You are standing at the edge of a room that smells like paper and dust, just the way a proper library should. The kind of smell that reminds you that time is real and also deeply overrated. Afternoon light drapes itself lazily across the parquet floor, broken into sleepy patterns by the tall windows lined with lace. There's a hush here, not silence exactly, but a hush, like the building is holding its breath politely so as not to interrupt your yawns. Your shoes make the tiniest squeaks as you step across the floor, past tall shelves that seem to lean ever so slightly, like elderly relatives trying to hear better. The books stare back at you with that mix of quiet dignity and mild judgment that only well-worn hardcovers can manage. You get the sense they've seen things, mostly coffee stains and people pretending to understand philosophy. The calendar says it's 1982. The newspapers say martial law, censorship, tension. But inside this library, it's just the slow ticking of a brass clock and the low hum of a space heater that's been almost broken for 6 years now. You pass a shelf labeled slightly misfiled nonfiction, which is both an admission and an invitation. Here we meet the librarians, not warriors, not revolutionaries, just soft-spoken caretakers in thick sweaters who have declared a quiet rebellion. They have decided quite firmly that the books are sad, and not in the poetic, tragic kind of way. No, literally sad, lonely, abandoned. So they do what any compassionate soul might do when faced with an underloved bookshelf. They start faking checkouts. Yes, that's our big historical fact tonight. Polish librarians, during a period of political repression, quietly forged library logs to show books were being borrowed. Not for gain, not for mischief, but to cheer up the shelves. Well, you may be wondering if this actually worked. I know one knows. Historians still debate whether the books felt any better, but you sense they must have. After all, a good lie told kindly might be the most honest thing in the world. One record shows a copy of the Semiotics of Turnip Cultivation checked out 17 times in 2 weeks. A statistical miracle, or a librarian with a soft spot for unloved root vegetables. Either way, the system smiled. And so did the shelves. You pass a tiny table with a teacup on it. The tea's gone cold, but the presence of the cup feels important, like a promise that someone meant to come back. The librarian's scarf is draped across the back of a chair. She's around here somewhere, probably in the back room forging joy, one fake checkout at a time. Now this is where our story begins, between the dust motes and the margins. So, and before we get too comfortable, fair warning, you probably won't make it through this day. That's okay. The shelves will understand. Go ahead and like and subscribe to Whispers of History if you're still awake. And comment your location and the local time. I wonder which time zones our story will wander through tonight. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. I passed the shelves through the soft hum of an old radio and into a day that never quite made the headlines. The library cat is asleep again. Marzipan, so named for his velvety orange coat and his suspiciously confectionery stillness, is curled into a question mark on top of the returns cart. He is snoring, gently, like he's narrating a story only he is allowed to hear. You pass him slowly, respectfully, because there are few things in the world more powerful than a sleeping cat with tenure. He opens one eye, surveys your existence, and promptly closes it again. You have been deemed non-threatening. Congratulations. The light this morning is a little more golden than usual, more like honey than sun. It pours through the tall lace-curtained windows in thin drizzles, pooling on the parquet floors and climbing the dusty jackets of unread tomes. There's something in the air, something between warmth and remembering. It smells faintly of paper, lemon polish, and the ghost of tea that was poured but never quite drunk. Mrs. Head Librarian and unspoken guardian of all that is decent in this world is already at the desk. She's wrapped in a chunky sweater the color of oversteeped Earl and wearing reading glasses that magnify her eyes just enough to make you feel gently examined. On the desk beside her rests a stack of books no one has checked out in months. Possibly years. She lifts one with the careful reverence of someone picking up a sleeping child. The title, An Illustrated History of Roman Plumbing, Volume II, she frowns at it, then smiles. Well, she murmurs, someone ought to pretend to love you. And just like that, she pulls out a small, perfectly squared lending card, dips her pen, and begins to write. The readers. A date 3 March. A book, The Glory of the Roman Sewer. She slides the card into its slot with the precision of a surgeon and the affection of a grandmother packing a lunchbox. The book is now borrowed by a man who does not exist. Now this is the Quiet Rebellion. They do this every morning. The librarians, not because they're trying to fool anyone, not even because the administration expects numbers. They do it because the book seems sad, and sadness in a place like this is contagious. Here's your historical anchor for tonight. During the martial law period in 1980s Poland, it's true, librarians across the country quietly fabricated fake checkouts for books that had sat untouched for too long. They invented readers, entire borrowed histories, whole journeys that never happened, except maybe somehow they did. One book reportedly belonged to a man named who loved comparative mythology and disliked Thursdays. Another to a woman named who only borrowed books with red covers. Their stories grew in the margins, on the backs of slips, in whispers between the shelves. Historians still debate whether this was an act of silent resistance or simply a bureaucratic kindness. But most agree the books looked less lonely after. You wander now into the corner room, the one with the armchairs that feel like they were upholstered in soft sighs. There's a small table by the window bearing a vase with one flower. Always just one. Today it's a daffodil, slightly wilted but holding on. A handwritten sign underneath reads, "Don't worry, this one's also just pretending to bloom." And here's your cultural curiosity for this hour. In the countryside, there's an old belief that books absorb the emotions of their readers. A joyful novel read during a time of grief becomes seasoned, and is said to offer better comfort to the next person who picks it up. This is why old Polish families used to pass down books wrapped in cloth, not to protect them but to contain their mood. You find a cloth-wrapped book now, no title on the spine, just a tag that reads, "Please open slowly. She's had a hard few decades." No, you don't open it. No, not yet. As outside, snowflakes drift lazily from a sky the color of parchment. Inside, a clock ticks. A book is returned, faked, of course, and Mrs. jots down another fictional patron with the same care a novelist uses to name her characters. I'll use a said, not to read, just to exist among words. And the books, real or not, seem to breathe a little easier. So do you. Somewhere near the card catalog, yes, the real one, not the digitized thing with buttons and judgment, you hear the soft thwack of a stamp meeting paper. It's rhythmic, meditative, like the heartbeat of bureaucracy, only friendlier. Mrs. is at it again, logging checkouts for readers who don't exist. Well, they exist in theory, just not in the kind of way that would hold up under scrutiny. Today's fictional borrowers include P, who supposedly borrowed advanced beekeeping for urban settings. There are no bees here. There is no urban, but the book looked too lonely not to feel useful. Another entry claims that someone named Anna S. borrowed tractors of the 20th century, volume II, the diesel years. You wonder what happened in volume I. You wonder if anyone's ever read either. Above the checkout desk, a string of paper snowflakes dangles lazily, moving only when someone opens the door. They were put up in December and forgotten. It's March now, but in here, seasons are more like suggestions. The whisper of turning pages surrounds you like a soft blanket. You're not the only one wandering. There's a student in the back, young, with a notebook full of idealism and smudged pencil lines. He's been here every afternoon for weeks. No one knows what he's working on. Some say a novel. Others whisper manifesto, but in a tone that suggests equal parts admiration and eye roll. Next to him sits a man who used to be a professor before the university trimmed its staff. He's taken up reading 16th century herbals for fun, which is either incredibly poetic or mildly alarming. He murmurs the Latin names aloud, as if the plants might hear and bloom from sheer nostalgia. A moment later, a draft blows in from the front door. Someone new has entered. She's wrapped in a navy coat, cheeks pink from cold, a parcel tucked under one arm. She walks straight to the donation table and places down 3 books, worn, loved, slightly damp around the edges. The title on top reads Knitting Without Regret, Patterns for Life's Little Failures. You suspect it's a memoir disguised as a how-to. She doesn't stay long. Just nods at the librarian, gives Marzipan a respectful glance, and disappears back into the snow. It occurs to you, as you watch the books settle into their new surroundings, that there's something sacred about second-hand pages. They come with invisible fingerprints and stories no one cataloged. You move through the rows and rows of shelves, and as you pass, you notice some of the books have bookmarks still tucked inside, receipts, leaves, a faded train ticket from 1979. There's one with a playing card, the Queen of Spades, wedged precisely at chapter 12. The mysteries of other people's reading habits are more intriguing than the actual plot sometimes. Historians still debate whether these minor acts of faking joy were a form of resistance or just kindness with paperwork. One scholar wrote that it was a revolution written in pencil, erased by no one. That scholar was later accused of romanticizing bureaucracy, which frankly takes talent. You find a chair tucked in a quiet corner, beneath a crooked portrait of a long-dead benefactor who stares down with an expression best described as mild disapproval. The chair squeaks when you sit, but in a comforting way, like it's been waiting for you. As across the room, a boy struggles to reach a high shelf. One of the librarians wordlessly brings over a wooden stool that looks older than the building itself. She doesn't say anything, just gives him a look that says, "Yes, you can do it, but also maybe don't fall." He grabs a book titled Philosophy for Dogs, a thoughtful guide to barking. It's a joke, obviously, but he opens it, reads it, laughs a little. That laughter becomes part of the library's soundscape, a quiet kind of joy that fits perfectly into the soft hush of this place. And here's our obscure tidbit of the night. One library in a nearby village used to shelve fiction and nonfiction together, organized not by genre or alphabet, but by whether the librarian thought the books were emotionally optimistic. They claimed it made people read more. They may have been right. Though the heating clicks again, outside the snow has thickened. Inside, time has loosened its grip. Now you stay in that chair a little longer, maybe forever. No, maybe just until the next stamp. You are still in the chair when the lights dim just slightly. Not off. Just gentled the way old lamps tend to do when they realize everyone in the room is already sleepy and there's no need to try so hard. In this new quiet, someone begins playing a cassette tape on the old player behind the front desk. It's Chopin, a nocturne, fuzzy at the edges from overuse, like a memory of music rather than music itself. You close your eyes not to sleep yet, but to listen more fully, which incidentally is also how naps begin. The warmth of the radiator to your left feels like a hug from someone too polite to use arms. The faint smell of floor polish and lemony paper mingles with the fatting cold that still clings to your coat. Oh, and then there's a voice. Not loud, not dramatic, just the kind of voice that belongs in a library, soft, factual, and just amused enough to suggest you might want to pay attention. It's Mrs. giving the two teen volunteers a lesson in spine repair. They're using a glue older than either of them. The glue smells weirdly sweet like vanilla and dust. Don't use too much, she warns. Books don't like to be suffocated, people either. You glance at the copy of the brief history of Polish shoelaces someone left on a nearby table. The inside flap has a hand-drawn map of cobblers from the 1800s. You're not sure how useful it is now, but it's charming in the same way that antique cutlery is, entirely unnecessary but very determined to exist. It's our historical moment for tonight. In the early 1980s, as Poland wrestled with martial law, economic struggle, and social upheaval, Libraries became unofficial sanctuaries, places where the line between truth and fiction could blur safely. While newspapers were censored and televisions broadcast state doctrine, the library shelves remained oddly neutral ground. A kind of paper Switzerland. That doesn't mean they were untouched by the times. Entire rows of political texts quietly disappeared. Whole authors became ghosts, their names white-labeled in catalogs, but still the shelves breathed, quietly, stubbornly. And that's when the librarians began whispering between themselves. If truth is risky, let us preserve joy. So they lied beautifully. Some books, in fact, never existed. One register lists a checkout for how to train your government agent, author unknown. Another for the complete guide to waiting in lines. That one reportedly had a waiting list. The scholars argue over whether these books were actual prank inserts or clever placeholders for titles that had been banned. Either way, the joke is still alive, and the catalog cards are still here, filed alphabetically with perfect calligraphy. You walk over to the humor and light essays section and find it mostly empty. Not because people don't read them, but because they do. A librarian told you once, during hard times, comedy books go out first and come back last. Which says something about both laughter and overdue fines. Marzipan, the cat, finally stirs. He stretches with theatrical disinterest and stalks over to the radiator, where he begins the noble task of melting into a warm puddle of fur. Someone turns the cassette over. Another nocturne begins. And the glue dries slowly, quietly, between the fingers of two teenagers who don't know that one day they'll remember this evening. Not for the glue, not for the books, but for the soft way time bent itself around them like a page turning itself. Now you pull your coat a little, as it's going to be a long, lovely night. Just like the library planned. The cassette clicks off, followed by a few seconds of silence so deep it feels intentional. Then, the soft hum of the radiator fills in the gap like a polite guest who realizes the host has dozed off mid-sentence. You blink slowly, unsure if the library has grown quieter or if your ears have simply adjusted to its rhythm, like an old dog learning the particular creaks of its home. You rise from the chair and begin to wander again, this time deeper into the building, past the regular shelves, past the typewriter room where no one types anymore but the keys still hold the shape of old arguments. You pass a sign that reads, "Archives, do not enter unless you intend to stay." It's only half a joke. There's a stairwell behind a swinging door, narrow and wooden, every step accompanied by the distinct whine of age. It's the sort of sound that says, "This staircase will remember you." And you believe it. Downstairs, it's cooler. The air feels heavier, like it carries stories that haven't been aired out in decades. Shelves rise around you like sleepy trees in a forgotten forest. You run your fingers along the spines and feel the texture of cracked leather, cloth bindings, peeling stickers. Someone once labeled one section books that smell like grandparents. The scent confirms this was not metaphor. You stop at a stack of bound magazines from 1957. The top one is an old Polish literary journal featuring an essay on the symbolism of pickles in Slavic folklore. A very serious, very scholarly piece, with footnotes and everything. Apparently, the pickle represents preservation and protest, because what's more rebellious than resisting rot? And here's your obscure cultural tidbit. In rural Polish villages, it was once customary to gift a single, elaborately spiced pickle to a neighbor during hard winters. Not for nutrition, not even for taste, but as a reminder, even salt can survive the cold. The librarian who told you this claimed it with the gravity of a sacred truth. You hear footsteps now, slow, deliberate, definitely not yours. You turn to find the janitor, mister, pushing a cart with one squeaky wheel and a radio that only picks up 2 stations, one that plays folk ballads and another that insists it's always midnight. He nods in acknowledgement but doesn't stop. You get the sense he's been here longer than the books. Maybe longer than time. He hums a tune you don't recognize as he disappears behind a rolling ladder. And here comes our next historical fact. During martial law, many libraries became the unlikely keepers of resistance literature, tucked inside the pages of harmless cookbooks, poetry anthologies, even gardening manuals. Entire underground pamphlets were passed around in hollowed-out books with titles like How to Make the Perfect Polish Pancake, which arguably is still useful either way. Historians still debate whether this was a form of defiance or simply necessity disguised as daily life. Some insist the librarians knew exactly what they were doing. Others claim it was just coincidence that every copy of Potatoes and You disappeared the same week a new protest broke out. Either way, the pancake book was always late returning. You trail your fingers along a stack of book crates marked Do Not Reshelve. You peek into one. It's full of handwritten notebooks, some of them signed only with initials, others with pseudonyms that range from philosophical to mildly ridiculous. One is signed Captain Metaphor. Another, The Lady with Too Many Umbrellas. You sit on a stool. There's a little desk lamp here, the kind that hums faintly when switched on. The bulb casts a golden glow across the crates like morning sunlight trapped in a jar. You flip open a notebook filled with short, anonymous poems. Most are forgettable, but one reads, "If no one checks me out, am I still a book? Do the shelves whisper? When the lights are off, do I dream of hands, or just dust? It's either very profound or written on a dare. You read it again and again." From somewhere upstairs, a faint chime sounds, the old grandfather clock by the front door. It's marking the hour, though you're not sure which one. The library seems to have slipped out of alignment with time. Down here beneath the shelves, surrounded by forgotten poems and phantom borrowers, you feel it too. And then the best part of the library happens. Nothing. No footsteps, no clocks, no pages, no breathing. Just the deep, velvety silence of a place that remembers everything but demands nothing. You sit there a long while. Eventually, the light dims just enough to let you know it's time to move on. When you return upstairs, the world feels slightly newer, like the air has been refolded and put back differently. It's the kind of quiet that only exists in libraries after dark, when even the ghosts are too polite to haunt and the fluorescent lights seem reluctant to flicker. At the front desk, Mrs. is preparing for the nightly ritual, the sacred act of writing tomorrow's fake returns. She dips her pen in ink, yes, ink, and begins a slow, careful list. The returns for March 4, 1982. Advanced Yogurt Science Reader, L. Folk Songs to Weep Softly Into Reader, Merk S. So you've been exiled, a beginner's guide reader, Anonymous. She pauses after the last one, smiles. That one's for me, she whispers, then draws a tiny heart beside the title. You glance over to the suggestion box. It contains 3 folded notes. One says, "More books about hope." Another says, "Please fix the wobbly stool in poetry." The third is just a child's drawing of a unicorn reading a book titled How to Be Magical. Next to the box is a handwritten sign, "Your thoughts matter, your handwriting less so." Marzipan is now curled in a cardboard box marked Mysteries. He snores like a typewriter trying not to be loud. No one dares move him. There's a volunteer shelving new arrivals. She's humming, gently, a song that might be a lullaby or just something made up. She pauses when she sees a worn paperback copy of The Art of Doing Nothing Well. She flips through it, nods to herself, and places it face out on the display shelf. It's another historical moment for the record. In 1983, a librarian in a neighboring town was reprimanded for reclassifying all government-issued pamphlets under science fiction. She defended herself by claiming they contained speculative content, wishful thinking, and occasional aliens. The punishment? A transfer to a larger library, which she reportedly enjoyed. The scholars still debate whether that reclassification was a calculated act of rebellion or simply a joke that went too far. Either way, the pamphlets remained in until 1986. You return to the poetry section. The wobbly stool is still wobbly. You sit anyway. There's a book here you haven't seen before, thin, bound in blue cloth, titled Things That Almost Happened. You open to a random page. It reads, "There was once a reader who came to this library late one snowy night. They weren't looking for anything in particular, but they found everything anyway." You close the book. You don't need to read more. The library is quiet again. The kind of quiet that isn't empty, it's full of patience, of presence, of shelves that lean gently toward you like elders in deep conversation. Outside, the snow continues, slow and steady, coating the world in hush. Inside, the books breathe softly, the ink dries patiently, and you, somewhere between visitor and character, begin to forget where your story ends and theirs begins. It's officially late. The kind of late where the world outside the library has begun to vanish behind layers of snowfall and the soft blur of struggling to stay awake. The library, however, has not noticed. Or maybe it has, but chooses not to acknowledge the passage of time, like a very dignified old man refusing to celebrate birthdays after 70. You remain seated on the wobbly stool in the poetry section, a little off balance in the best way. The book Things That Almost Happened rests beside you, still open to that line about finding everything when looking for nothing. You think about that for a long time, long enough that you forget to check your watch, long enough that the concept of checking your watch becomes quaint. Somewhere nearby, you hear the rustle of a paper map unfolding. Not a phone, not a digital chirp, an actual map. You follow the sound and peek around a corner to find two middle-aged friends hunched over a table, arguing cheerfully over whether the Polish city of is more east or more emotionally central. They're planning a literary pilgrimage, one explains, to visit the birthplaces of obscure poets no one remembers and who perhaps didn't want to be remembered. Their map is littered with penciled notes like "good soup here" and "bookstore that smells like wood smoke." One of them points to and says, "And this is where the poems hide when they're tired." They both nod in solemn agreement. On the shelf behind them sits a dusty, untouched volume, Regional Post Offices and their dramatic architecture. You gently slide it out. Inside is a single dried flower pressed so carefully that you feel guilty breathing near it. Beneath the flower a note, "From the counter at the post office in. He waited 48 minutes to speak to me. I said thank you and he looked like that was enough." You're not entirely sure what to do with that kind of tenderness. So you do what most people do in libraries. You quietly put it back. Now, tonight's historical fact feels fitting. In the 1980s, during Poland's most politically restrictive years, librarians began hosting secret book clubs that weren't book clubs at all. They were safe spaces to share poetry that had been unofficially banned, books passed hand to hand, with readers memorizing stanzas to avoid being caught with the physical copies. One librarian described it as reading with your mouth shut and your heart open. Historians still debate whether this practice was widespread or only limited to larger cities like Warsaw, and what they don't debate is its effect. Poems became passwords and metaphors became lifeboats. You take a slow walk through the unpopular history section, labeled with a handwritten tag that simply reads things no one asked for but probably should know. It includes such titles as the strategic use of bell towers in medieval disputes, a short history of socks in parliament and bureaucracy, a love story. That last one is fiction, probably. Here's your cultural tidbit for the night. For centuries in parts of Eastern Europe, librarians were considered not just keepers of knowledge but subtle matchmakers. If you borrowed the same book as someone else, a librarian might mention it, casually, as if literature, not loneliness, had anything to do with it. One recorded instance led to a marriage that lasted 42 years, all because two people loved a brief encyclopedia of figs. You walk past the copier room. The machine is ancient. It growls more than it prints. A sign taped to its side says, "Treat it like a grandfather, slow, deaf, full of stories." Someone has drawn a mustache on the paper tray. Beyond that room is the children's corner, long closed for the night. But the small chairs remain perfectly aligned, and the bookshelf labeled Impossible Animals is full to bursting. You pick out a copy of The Snoring Dragon of. Inside is an illustration of a very tired-looking dragon sipping tea with a quote that reads, "Even monsters need rest." And so maybe do you. You return to your chair. The poetry stool creaks in protest, so you move to a deep red velvet armchair near the back, one that has definitely seen better decades but still holds its shape with dignity. It feels like sitting inside someone's memory. Though the heat from the radiator now feels like a soft murmur, more comforting than warmth. It doesn't ask anything of you, it simply is. You blink slowly. The snow outside has become thicker, clinging to the windows in uneven patches. From the inside, it looks like frosting, like the library itself is a forgotten cake in the quietest bakery on earth. Across the room, a young man with a nervous energy is flipping through a book at high speed, stopping only occasionally to scribble notes in a tiny pocket journal. He's researching something, or running from something, or both. The book he's using is titled Revolutions in Soft Voices, Hidden Acts of Resistance in Public Spaces. It's half academic, half whispered prayer. You hear him murmur, "This place, it really happened." And somehow you know he's not talking about the library, or maybe he is. He looks up and catches your eye as if realizing he said it aloud. You smile softly. So does he. That's it, the entire conversation. Behind you, a shelf labeled Unclassified Miscellanea practically groans with neglected books. You're drawn to one that doesn't even have a spine label. The cover reads Borrower Unknown, Stories from Library Cards. Inside is a collection of fictionalized tales based entirely on the real names scribbled onto old checkout slips. Each story is no more than a page long. One reads, "The bee borrowed fishing in the rain 7 times in 1 month. She never fished. But she liked how the raindrops looked in chapter 3. They reminded her of her grandmother's window." Another one says, "Them, age 9, borrowed the big book of big dinosaurs. Returned it early. Said it scared the ants in his bedroom." It's the kind of book that makes you laugh once, then pause for 5 minutes. Now tonight's big historical truth. Many libraries in Eastern Europe were required to submit lists of most borrowed books to state authorities each month. To avoid suspicion, librarians often inflated numbers for state-approved texts, creating the illusion of political loyalty while protecting the actual favorites from scrutiny. One librarian from once wrote in her report that Soviet tractor innovations had a waiting list of 13 patrons. In reality, the book hadn't moved in 6 years and was currently holding up a wobbly table leg. The scholars still debate whether these fabricated statistics were a quiet protest or simply creative administration. Either way, the book held up its end of the bargain. As at the end of one shelf you spot a tiny slip of paper tucked into the wood. It reads, "If you're reading this, you're part of the story now." It's unsigned. Now you sit down on the floor. You lean back against a warm, humming shelf of books that haven't been touched in years. And you listen to the absence of hurry, to the pages turning in other corners of the room, to the story still unfolding around you. You don't need to go anywhere else. The library has already brought you here. It's almost midnight now, if such a thing exists in this place. There's no clock that you can see, only the slow, ceremonial shift in energy, as if the books themselves have decided to exhale. The air feels even thicker, but not heavy, more like the warm hush under blankets right before you fall asleep. It's the kind of quiet that only happens when every thought has been placed gently back on the shelf. The velvet chair holds your shape like a memory that refuses to fade. Around you, the library seems to sink deeper into its own dream. The lamps glow a little dimmer, as though even electricity has started whispering instead of speaking. You watch a janitor, possibly the same one or maybe just another variation of Mr., slowly dust a row of encyclopedias with the care of someone tucking in old friends. He hums a tune too old to be trendy and too melodic to be accidental. It might be a lullaby, or a hymn, or both. Behind him, a cart of unshelved books waits in quiet protest. A small handwritten sign says, "These books will find their way home in their own time, like everyone else." You rise and begin drifting again, pulled not by intention but by the slight magnetism of unread things. You pass the foreign language section, where dictionaries line up like diplomats who haven't spoken to each other in years. Then the science shelf, where a copy of Astrophysics and You, a surprising love story, leans precariously against physics for the sleep-deprived. Your hand hovers over a small, cloth-bound volume titled The Art of Losing Quietly. You open to a random page and find this line, "Sometimes the best protests leave no echo." You close it gently, as if it might dissolve. And then you hear it. Laughter. Not loud, not disruptive. Just a warm thread of it unraveling softly from somewhere in the back. You follow it to a group of elderly women seated around a low circular table. They each have a book in their lap and a cup of something that smells like tea or maybe spiced fruit or maybe nostalgia. One of them reads aloud from a diary, likely one of the donated journals the library has informally adopted. On Tuesday, borrowed a book about successful marriages, returned it unread, felt like I was cheating on my independence. Though they all chuckle, one says, "She's onto something," and sips her tea with a grin that holds decades of justified rebellion. It turns out this is the Midnight Readers Circle. Not an official club, just a habit. They gather most nights, never too many, always different books, but the same unspoken purpose. To be present, to be slow, to be surrounded by stories and people who won't interrupt them mid-sentence. You're invited to sit, you do. Tonight's discussion, books that have saved them even just a little. One woman whose earrings resemble tiny sunflowers holds up the philosophy of potatoes. She claims Chapter 5 changed her view on failure forever. Another gestures to a battered copy of Walking Alone and Other Social Skills. This taught me how to enjoy my own company without apology, she says, tapping the cover like it's sacred scripture. They look at you. What about you, one asks. You haven't spoken all evening, but your voice arrives soft and unhurried. I think this library might be the book. That's when they all smile, not the polite kind, the real kind, the kind that folds you into a story without needing your backstory. Now, tonight's historical moment comes to you quietly, like a note passed between friends. During Poland's martial law period, several libraries acted as unofficial shelters, sometimes literally. People sought warmth, electricity, a sense of place. Some librarians left out pillows and extra shawls without comment. One library inn is said to have hosted secret sleepovers for students who missed the last tram and were afraid to walk home. Historians still debate whether these sleep-ins were acts of civil kindness or subtle political defiance. But the students remembered, and so did the books. One of the midnight readers hands you a biscuit from a tin that says "Not Poisoned" in bold letters. You laugh and take it anyway. It tastes like lemon and old friendship. You stay for 3 more stories, 2 more laughs, and 1 recitation of a poem that no one quite remembers the ending to. But they all agree the middle was worth it. You finally excuse yourself, whispering thank yous and nodding your way out. They don't stop you, they don't need to. They know you'll be back. You wander into the library's oldest wing now. It's not marked, no velvet rope, no grand archway, just a corridor that seems to slope down slightly where the floorboards get more philosophical with every creak. This is where the books live that don't get read anymore. Not because they're irrelevant, but because they're tired. You can almost feel it. The weight of forgotten ink, shelves titled treatises and compendiums and other works too heavy to carry home. You pause before a book titled 17 Letters to No One in Particular. The dust on the spine gives way easily, like it's relieved to be noticed. Inside are actual letters, written in the 1920s by a woman who signs only as Lena. They're addressed to dear whoever might need this someday. The first letter begins, "If you are reading this, it means we survived, or at least someone did." The final letter ends, "I never stopped believing that words could keep us warm." There's a little silence after that. You let it stretch out. You let it sit. Some silences are meant to be listened to. Now, tonight's cultural tidbit. It was once common in Polish libraries to create book nests, cozy, semi-hidden corners designed to encourage longer stays. Librarians would tuck chairs behind shelves, near radiators, or under stairwells, and place books there they thought needed company. Readers often left anonymous notes tucked inside, responses, doodles, quotes. These nests were never officially acknowledged but became known quietly as the pages' resting places. You walk past one such nest now, still there, still hidden. Someone left a blanket on the chair and a small dish of dried cranberries with a note, "In case anyone forgot dinner." And now your historical note for the hour. In a small town near Lublin, a group of librarians once conspired to fake an entire reading group that didn't exist, complete with fabricated attendance sheets, monthly discussions, and even fictional reading preferences for each member. The reason? To keep funding from being cut. Every month they submitted reports. Prefers wartime memoirs with optimism. Is very curious about steam-powered inventions. Old Mrs. R rereads Russian and leaves with her cheeks red from laughter. There was no Mrs. R. Just imagination wielded like a tool. When auditors finally visited, they asked why no one showed up for the book club that day. The librarian smiled and said, they're very shy. Historians still debate whether the auditors knew and played along. One of them was seen laughing to himself while checking the attendance sheet. That sheet, by the way, still exists. It's stored in a folder labeled Dreamers. You pause now at the base of another staircase. This one leads nowhere in particular. A sign beside it reads, "All routes lead to somewhere, even here." While you take a seat on the second step, it feels right. There's no rush, no destination. Just a staircase in a library that fakes its statistics, tucks in its books, and waits quietly for you to notice it's still alive. You rest your head against the wall. You close your eyes. And the library breathes with you. You don't remember dozing off exactly. Only the sensation of your thoughts curling inward like a cat in a sunbeam. When you open your eyes again, the light hasn't changed much. It's still that soft, buttery gold that could be dawn or could be a bulb with a patient soul. The staircase under you creaks once, acknowledging your return to consciousness without judgment. Your legs have gone slightly numb from sitting, but it's the good kind of numb. The kind that comes from sitting still long enough to feel like you're part of the furniture, part of the story. A temporary bookmark in the library's long, slow narrative. You rise and stretch. Somewhere deep in the stacks, a book falls. No one rushes to retrieve it. The sound is accepted, even welcomed like thunder after still air. This library doesn't punish imperfection. It files it gently under character. You wander past the philosophy shelf now, labeled not by Dewey Decimal but by vibe. One row is titled Big Thinks for Small Hours. Another reads books that can't help themselves. There's an entire subsection called Thoughts We Pretend We Don't Have, and next to it, Thoughts That Keep Us Company Anyway. You pick up a thin volume, On the Virtue of Doing Nothing at All. Inside, on the title page, someone has scrawled, "For whoever is avoiding something important, congratulations." Now this might be your favorite book so far. You settle into another chair different from before but still appropriately mismatched and faintly lopsided. It sits next to a window that fogs from your breath when you exhale. Outside, the snow continues to fall with a kind of stubborn elegance. Not hurried, not showy, just committed. Here's your historical fact for this quiet hour. During the height of Cold War-era surveillance in Poland, it was rumored that some libraries employed code words in their reading logs. A checkout of geography of the Balkans might mean someone wanted political news. Soviet weather reports was a euphemism for censorship updates. And techniques for reasons no one has explained sometimes meant, we're meeting after closing. Bring cake. Historians still debate whether this secret coding system was real or merely folklore passed around by catalog clerks. No written guide has been found, but a card in one archive bears the note, "Recheck, too popular, suspicious." The idea that bureaucracy could become rebellion is the kind of detail that makes you want to hug a librarian. Near the corner, you notice a shelf partially blocked by a coat rack. On closer inspection, it's labeled endings and other necessary goodbyes. You run your hand along the spines, how to close a door kindly. The last postcard, we never talked about the weather after that. Each book title feels like something someone almost said. You take one down, The Gentle Art of Living. Inside, a pressed napkin with handwriting on it. The ink has faded, but you can still make out. You don't always get to say goodbye, but sometimes the library says it for you. You sit with that for a moment, then two, then more. The radiator hums behind you. A book whispers shut on another table. A chair squeaks in the corner, not in protest, just in acknowledgement. And then comes your obscure cultural tidbit. In 19th century Polish mountain towns, it was believed that books that went too long unread would start dreaming, and might whisper to each other on cold nights. Children were taught to stroke the covers gently to remind the books they were still wanted. One librarian in the kept a special chair just for these dreaming books, and rotated them through it like guests at a quiet dinner party. Well, the chair still exists. It's here actually. You notice it now tucked in a small nook near the music section. A faded armchair with a little paper sign on its armrest, reserved for forgotten things. A book of violin rests on the cushion, spine slightly cracked as if mid-reverie. You take a slow walk back toward the front desk, where the last light of evening, or is it early morning, gathers in a sleepy pool. Mrs. is gone now, probably home, or perhaps somewhere deeper in the archives alphabetizing the intangible. In her place sits a small typewritten sign. Gone to rest, please do the same. The library will keep breathing while you're away. And below it in pencil, P.S. Help yourself to the biscuit tin, still not poisoned. You sit once more just to feel the chair accept you. You're not sure how long you stay this time. Long enough. Now you're back in the central reading hall, where the ceiling arches like a cathedral and the air has thinned into reverence. The chandeliers glow faintly with the effort of staying awake, their light falling unevenly like moonlight filtered through stained glass. This space feels holy, but not in a sacred sense. Holy in the way a quiet Sunday feels, or a room where someone just cried and was heard. You walk slowly, noticing things you hadn't before. A tiny crack running through the tiles shaped almost like a river. A forgotten bookmark peeking from a shelf. A velvet cushion on a bench that's been turned over to hide an ink stain. It is here in this slow sanctuary that the library keeps its most confusing shelf, books that are neither here nor there. No one knows who organized it. The titles include Instructions for Things That No Longer Exist, The Memories of Places That Moved, How to Love a Clock That Runs Backward. One spine simply reads, and it rattles when you touch it. Next to this shelf is a glass case displaying a rotating set of oddities. Today's exhibit includes a cracked teacup from 1944, a single shoelace labeled "From a Hopeful Afternoon," and a postcard addressed to somewhere that doesn't hurt. A small plaque reads, "Donations accepted, especially from the heart." Here's your historical gem for this hour. In the late 1980s, as the regime began to shift, some libraries in Poland began collecting not just books but objects. Emotional archives, they called them. A place to store not facts but feelings, an umbrella from a long walk, a diary page someone tore out but couldn't throw away, a cassette tape of someone humming. These were cataloged without numbers, just stories. As one librarian noted, "Not all history is recorded, some is only remembered. We keep what people didn't know they were trying to forget." You find a chair near this exhibit. A round-backed thing with frayed armrests and an embroidered cushion that looks like it was done by someone with more hope than skill. You lean back. You breathe in the scent of old paper and quiet intentions. You exhale something you didn't know you were carrying. And outside, the sky has turned the color of blank pages. And inside, you've become part of the story. And maybe, for now, that's enough. You wake again if you were ever asleep at all. Somewhere between awareness and dreaming, the library has shifted, but not changed. It's like walking through a familiar room at night where the furniture hasn't moved but everything feels new just because it's bathed in moonlight. You're not disoriented, just slowed down, and maybe that's the goal. You step lightly across the wooden floorboards, feeling every sigh and creak beneath your feet. The library welcomes your return the way a cat acknowledges affection, without enthusiasm but unmistakably. Near the far end of the room, tucked behind a spiral staircase no one ever climbs, you discover a narrow alcove lit by a single lamp. The shade is made of yellowed paper, sheet music from a forgotten concerto, and it casts a soft, golden ring around a round table. On the table is a guest book, cracked at the spine. Above it, a crooked sign. Write something if you wish, even if it's nothing. You flip through the pages. Most entries are dated in the past year, but some stretch back decades. Notes left in pencil and fountain pen, ink and crayon, graphite and hope. I came to find a book, stayed to remember who I was. The silence here understands me better than my therapist. I kissed her here. Page 312 of the encyclopedia section. And one almost too faint to read. This place doesn't cure loneliness, but it does keep it company. Tonight's obscure cultural detail. In several Polish libraries during the 20th century, particularly in mining towns, there was a tradition of Black Saturdays. On these days, patrons would gather not to borrow books but to sit in silence, dressed in black, honoring stories they felt had been silenced, books banned, voices lost, chapters never written. The practice wasn't advertised, but the chairs would fill, and the shelves would listen. You sit for a moment, the guest book still open in your lap. Then you borrow a pen left beside it, its cap chewed, its ink a little dry, and write. I didn't come here on purpose, but I don't want to leave on purpose either. You close the book. A breeze moves past you, subtle but distinct. There are no windows open, no vents that you can see, just the hush of words rearranging themselves somewhere nearby. You rise again, drawn now to the far end of the main hall. There, behind two oak double doors left half ajar, lies the music room. It isn't a concert hall or a listening lounge. Just a collection of vinyl records, cassettes, and the occasional reel-to-reel tape, all organized with the devotion of someone who understands that sound, too, is a kind of story. As on the wall is a rack of headphones, old cushioned things, the kind that make your ears warm and your thoughts private. You slip one on and press a button labeled for when it's too quiet. The soft piano begins, not polished, not rehearsed, just present, like someone playing from another room, not to perform but to process. A label on the player reads, "Recorded in 1984, a librarian's son. He said the music made him less afraid of silence." Tonight's historical insight arrives like a quiet chord. Some libraries in Poland, especially during martial law, doubled as informal music archives. Classical records, folk ballads, protest songs disguised as lullabies, catalogued, stored, and loaned out like treasure maps. People would borrow these tapes and gather around radios in kitchens, pressing play like it was an act of resistance. And sometimes it was. One particularly brave librarian was known to slip coded messages into cassette cases. Nothing dramatic, just underlined lyrics, a whispered introduction, a sudden silence where none should be. It wasn't espionage. It was empathy. Historians still debate whether this qualifies as a form of information warfare or simply comfort distribution. Most agree, both. You let the piano play a little longer. A soft voice joins it, not singing, just reciting poetry over the music. It's a woman's voice, clear, steady, a little tired. The library is not a building. It's a boat. And books are oars. And librarians are the ones who keep rowing. Even when no one's on board. You close your eyes just for a moment. The headphones go still. And the silence returns. The corridor outside the music room leads you to a part of the library rarely visited. Not because it's restricted, but because it simply doesn't ask for attention. It just waits. This is the map room. It's an entire chamber of drawers and cabinets, rolled scrolls, and folded parchment. There's a table in the middle with a cracked glass top and a magnifying lens bolted to its frame, shaped like a monocle for giants. You glide your hand over the drawers, each labeled in fading script. The rivers that forgot their names. The cities that moved slightly to the left. The mountains that never existed but should have. The borders that were someone else's idea. You pull open one drawer and find a map drawn entirely in pencil. A coastline outlines what looks like a continent made of size. In the corner, a tiny label, places I almost visited. Another drawer contains maps made by children, crayon routes to imaginary homes, legends that include symbols for tree I liked and where the dog barked back. One map is entirely of rooftops, drawn from memory by someone who used to sneak out after curfew. There's a globe in the corner with no labels at all, just color and shape and quiet potential. Tonight's historical gem. In the 1980s, a few libraries in Poland partnered with local artists to create emotional atlases, maps of memory, not geography. Residents were asked to chart their personal histories, the corner where they first heard bad news, the bridge they crossed while falling in love, the field where they lost a sibling's kite. These maps were never published. They weren't meant to be, but many are still stored in cardboard boxes beneath these very drawers. You find one, its creator signed it only as age 72. The map is a circle, no edges, just loops of color and phrases written along curving paths. Where I danced alone after the wars. Where I told him I forgave him, even if he didn't ask. Where I buried my favorite scarf, don't ask. A note in the corner reads, I wanted to make a map in case I ever forgot who I had been. You place the map gently back. And now, tonight's cultural tidbit. Some librarians in this era kept private checkout confessionals, not official records, just small notebooks hidden under desks. When someone returned a book, they could write anonymously what they found inside, emotionally, not just literally. This book helped me cry when no one was home. I lied to someone I loved. This book felt like an apology. And Chapter 9 made me believe I was still part of the world. These confessionals were never analyzed, never published, but librarians would sometimes read them aloud to each other during lunch breaks, quietly, reverently. You linger at the doorway now, glancing back at the drawers and rolled-up timelines. You wonder what your map might look like. What you'd name the rivers that run through your memories. What color you'd use for regret. What symbol you'd choose for hope. And you know in this library, somewhere, somehow, it already exists. You just haven't opened the right drawer yet. The air in the map room carries a different kind of silence, not absence but absorption. You could stay here forever, folded into the margins of places that never made it into travel guides. But the library, in its subtle wisdom, always seems to know when it's time to move on. You return to the main corridor, trailing fingertips along wood paneling that feels worn down in all the right places. Every groove tells you, yes, others have wandered here. And no, they weren't in a hurry either. You pass by a tall grandfather clock that doesn't chime, doesn't tick, doesn't even try to pretend. Someone has pasted a label on it, temporarily not measuring time, and below it in smaller script, since 1978. At the base of the clock, someone has left a plate with 2 sugar cubes and a single chamomile flower. You don't ask questions. In here, offerings are just another kind of punctuation. Next, you find yourself in a room unlike the others, a circular space lit entirely by candles. Not because electricity isn't available, but because is a choice. The air smells faintly of beeswax ink and maybe something herbal. A handwritten sign by the door welcomes you. This is the room of unsent letters. Please enter quietly. Some people are still writing. You do. The walls are lined with cubby holes, each marked with a name or pseudonym, some in Polish, some in no known language. Inside many of the cubbies are stacks of folded pages, envelopes never sealed, some even tied with bits of ribbon or string. There's a table in the center, its surface scratched and stained and wholly in the way kitchen tables are where truth happens between sips of tea. You take a seat, a single piece of paper lies before you. No lines, just a header in faded type to whom I thought I'd become. You sit with it, you don't write, not yet. You just let the question hover over your head like dust in candlelight. Tonight's historical note. In the late 20th century, a small collection of Polish libraries began curating what they called epistolary silence. It was an unofficial archive of unsent letters donated anonymously. Some were found tucked into books. Others mailed without return addresses. Most were heartbreakingly simple. I'm sorry I left. I wish I'd told you I hated that job. I still set a place for you sometimes. These letters were stored not for study but for safekeeping. It was understood that the act of writing was the point. Preservation, not publication. Historians still debate the ethical implications of archiving such private sorrow. But most agree, the silence those letters held needed a home. You eventually begin writing. Slowly. Your hand moves as if it remembers something you haven't yet recalled. Dear you, I've been looking for you in every book I've read. So sometimes I think I see your shadow in the acknowledgments. Other times I find your absence in the way chapters end too soon. But here, in this chair, I am starting to believe. You might been me all along. You don't sign it. You fold it. You place it in an empty cubby hole. Someone someday will find it. From there, you drift toward the stairwell once again, not to go up or down, but simply to pass by it, the way one might pass a familiar landmark on an evening walk. You find yourself back near the poetry wing, which has somehow rearranged itself. Not literally, of course, but the energy is different now. The lights here are low and golden, casting long shadows like stretched thoughts. A sign reads, "Poetry shelved by weather. A land beneath it. Cloudy. A thunder in the distance. Muggy but romantic. Clear but untrustworthy. You don't even question it. You reach for a slim volume under titled Rooms Without Windows. Inside, each poem is no more than 4 lines, but each one feels like a room you've been in before. There was a hallway in my mind, where I kept your coat. Even after winter passed, I could not return it. Another, the worst part of the storm was not the thunder, but the silence. When it ended, you close the book gently, place it back like a candle on an altar. Nearby, someone has left a bowl filled with folded slips of paper. A note above it says, "Emergency poems, take one or leave one." You reach in and draw one at random. It reads, "You are not the last lines. You are the breath between stanzas. You don't put it back. You don't have to." Tonight's historical gem. During the 1981 censorship crisis, a group of librarians and local poets in southern Poland organized silent poetry readings. Patrons would check out selected poems written by underground authors, take them home, and read them aloud to no one, or to plants, or to their cats. The idea was simple: poems should be spoken, even if unheard. Some readers wrote back to the authors, unsure if their letters would ever reach them. Most didn't, but one poet years later said, "I never saw their faces, but I heard them hearing me." The scholars still debate whether this qualifies as a form of publication. But in the records of that small-town library, there remains a checkout slip for collected resistance poems. Beneath it, a note in the margin. This one was read beside a pot of tea and a softly weeping radiator. You tuck your slip of emergency poetry into your coat pocket. It feels like armor. You begin to wander again, no direction, just invitation. The library has many more corners, many more shelves. And it seems now you are finally walking at the library's pace. That is not walking at all. Just obeying. And somehow that is everything. There's a softness now to the entire world inside the library, as if the walls have absorbed your stillness and returned it as warmth. Not heat, exactly, just comfort. Like the feeling of waking up and realizing you still have hours left to sleep. You move slower now, not out of fatigue, but because anything faster would feel disrespectful. Even your thoughts are packing themselves. The urgency of the outside world, the clocks, the headlines, the pings of expectation, has long since melted off your shoulders. You pass a hallway you're almost sure wasn't there earlier. Narrow and book-lined on both sides, with barely enough space to walk through without brushing the shelves. The books here are all bound in deep greens and browns, titles pressed into the covers with gold foil so worn you can barely read them. But the titles don't seem to care if you can. A sign hangs crookedly from a thumbtack at the entrance. These books contain no answers, only better questions. You accept the offer and slip between the shelves. You pull a random book, a guide to lost things that still matter. Inside a list. The place you meant to return to. The apology you rehearsed but never delivered. The version of yourself you forgot was still waiting. That one book you lent out and never saw again, it's here probably. You flip to the back and find a folded paper unsigned, in looping script. If you find this, please understand, I didn't mean to forget. I just ran out of space to remember. You tuck the note back in, it belongs there. Tonight's historical truth. Many Polish libraries, especially in the later years of the Cold War, began keeping informal remembrance files not catalogued by author or subject, but by theme. Love that never happened, people we had to leave, jobs that broke us but paid the rent. Patrons could submit pages anonymously. Letters, lists, poems, even objects. These were never displayed, only preserved. Their existence was an open secret. Historians still debate whether this was emotional archiving or simply librarians doing what they always do, offering space to people who didn't know where else to put their grief. And here's your obscure cultural tidbit. In some rural Polish towns, it was customary during winter to gather the entire village and share stories not of glory or triumph, but of almosts. Almost married, almost left, almost became a pianist. These nearlies were considered sacred testaments to the lives people carried in silence. The librarian often hosted these circles. Back in the hallway, you come to a single chair and a wall-mounted shelf with only one book on it. The chair is upholstered in thick green velvet, its legs uneven in a way that encourages thought rather than posture. You sit. Though the book is titled "This is Where It Gets Tender," you open it. And inside are only blank pages. As every single one. You stare for a long time, and then on page 53 you notice the tiniest writing in the corner. It's okay if you needed a place to feel without being watched. You leave the book open on your lap, not reading, just listening to it. The hallway grows even quieter, and for a brief, infinite moment, you feel entirely known by something that doesn't have a face or name, but knows how to hold you. Eventually, you stand, not because you want to leave, but because you've been filled. And something in you says it's time to find another shelf to pour that fullness into. You exit the hallway and turn into a room marked by a curtain of blue beads strung together with paper clips and dried chamomile. A sign dangles above. The room of hypotheticals. Please do not reshelve the books. They like where they are. Inside, it's dim and narrow, with walls painted the color of dusk. The shelves here are stranger. You glance at the titles. Oh, if I had said yes at the train station. Oh, the marriage I never entered. The lives in which I learned to sing. What would happen if I'd stayed that night? Now this is fiction, clearly. Or autobiographies. Or both. There's a copy of alternate endings for arguments we had. The contents are scribbled in the margins, added by various hands over time. On one page, what if I just listened instead of defending myself? Another, what if we both stopped needing to be right? You flip to a random entry and read. In another version of our lives, you don't leave. You stay. And I still write this book. But it's filled with different kinds of silence. There's a bench against the wall, low to the ground and draped in what looks like an old curtain repurposed into a blanket. You sit. The fabric smells like lavender and dust. Now, tonight's historical gem. In the early 1990s, one experimental Polish library created an exhibit titled Books That Should Have Been Written. Patrons could submit titles and summaries of books they wished existed. The librarians displayed them on empty shelves, complete with fake catalog cards. Some entries. How to forgive a father who never asked. Recipes for one that don't feel like loneliness. Raising yourself while raising children. A history without the victors. No pages, no text, just titles, spines, and longing. Over time, writers began responding. Real books emerged. Some self-published, some scribbled on napkins. A few even made it into print. One librarian called it hope through pretend publishing. The scholars still debate whether this qualifies as performance art or participatory therapy. Most readers didn't care. And here's your cultural tidbit. Some libraries, especially in post-war Poland, kept a what-if suggestion box. But instead of asking for book requests, they invited patrons to submit questions they didn't have answers to. Not philosophical, personal. So what if I'd been born taller? Or what if I never learned to be less angry? So what if I'm actually okay and no one told me? The box wasn't opened. It was buried in the garden beside the library. Once a year, a librarian would plant flowers over it. They called them questions in bloom. You lie back on the bench now. You close your eyes. And behind your eyelids, you see the titles of books you haven't yet written, lives you haven't quite lived. Versions of you that got lost on the way here, but still somehow left breadcrumbs behind. The library has them. It keeps us everything. Even what never happened. The room of hypotheticals releases you gently, like a friend who understands that parting isn't the end of company. The bead curtain rustles softly behind you, each chamomile bloom brushing your shoulder like a whisper from a dream you nearly remembered. You pause in the hallway, hands deep in your pockets. There's something comforting about walking slowly in a place designed for pause. Even the light here obeys different rules. It doesn't shine so much as settle like powdered sugar on a forgotten cake. You've lost all sense of time, but it no longer feels like a loss, just an exchange. Your feet take you next to a part of the library labeled marginalia. Not a section, a philosophy. The walls are lined with books not for their content, but for what readers wrote into them. Whole shelves of texts filled with scribbled notes, underlined phrases, tiny drawings, corrections, questions, confessions. A sign reads, This section is alive, please handle with care. Also feel free to write back. You pull out a copy of a manual for beginning again. Inside, the margins are crowded. I read this after she left. It didn't help, but it made me feel less alone in the trying. Whoever wrote the chapter on moving on with grace clearly never loved a trumpet player. Page 62 made me cry. Page 87 made me try again. To the person who underlined the last sentence, thank you. I didn't know I needed someone to notice it. The sentence in question. And even the act of opening the door counts as courage. You turn the page and find a reply, written in a different pens. Then here's to small hinges and shaky hands. You smile without realizing it. Tonight's historical detail is about a library in central Poland, where between 1979 and 1987, a group of librarians began preserving books specifically for their marginalia. They called it the Collection of Conversations. Patrons were encouraged to annotate, comment, and reply to strangers across the pages. One novel about solitude ended up with a running dialogue between 3 readers that lasted 4 years, none of whom ever met. Historians still debate whether this violated proper cataloging standards or revolutionized reader engagement. One archivist simply shrugged and said, "Well, at least the book wasn't lonely." And here's your cultural gem for this hour. In some Polish libraries, there was a quiet tradition known as book whispering. When a book was returned after a long time, the librarian would hold it to their ear and pretend to listen. Then they would say something like, it had a lot to say, or it missed you, or it learned some new secrets while it was out. It was a way of gently reminding patrons that books aren't static, they're changed by the journey just like people. You return the manual to the shelf and place your hand on its spine for a moment before walking on. You come next to a hallway with no sign at all, just a single chair outside and a mirror beside the door. The mirror is old, cracked at one edge, but the kind that still shows you not just how you look, but how tired you are. Above it, written in chalk, "As if you still remember how to wonder this way." While you enter, the room beyond is barely a room at all, more like a breath held inside a building. The walls are lined with shelves, but instead of books, they hold objects, little ones, pocket-sized. There's a pair of gloves stitched together at the fingertips, a spoon wrapped in blue thread, a half-finished letter carved into wood, an empty jar labeled last summer's air, a pack of cigarettes with a love note tucked inside, a stone with a single word scratched into it, "Wait." A sign nearby explains nothing. Or perhaps it does. These are not artifacts, these are pauses. Each object has a card beside it, handwritten in mismatched pens and various styles. He gave me these gloves and said, "So you don't have to hold my hand in the cold." I wore them for 7 winters. This spoon belonged to no one, but every roommate we had used it. It was how we measured times. I carved this letter during a blackout. I was writing to someone who had already stopped listening. Now, this jar used to smell like heat and peaches. I open it sometimes just to remember sweat and sunburn. Oh, she never smoked, but she carried these to match his jacket. They broke up 3 weeks later. And the stone. Well, the card simply says, it wasn't time yet. Now, tonight's historical fact. In the early 2000s, inspired by older archival traditions, a few Polish libraries began collecting emotional objects as part of their memory cabinets. These weren't traditional exhibits, there was no guided tour, no placards, just donated items with attached handwritten notes. It was understood that no item had to be important, only real. A napkin from a breakup. A key to a door that no longer existed, a receipt from a meal that changed someone's mind. Historians still debate whether this belongs in museums or in hearts, but visitors returned, and sometimes they left objects of their own. You move slowly through the room, aware that every item here once fit into someone's palm the way a decision does before it becomes a consequence. And here's your cultural tidbit. Some libraries, particularly in rural villages, had a practice called closed quiet. It was a specific kind of hush honored once a week where patrons and staff alike would spend the day not reading, not organizing, not even shelving, but just being among the books. No conversation, no movement unless necessary. It was said that during closed quiet, the library itself was allowed to rest, to grieve, to listen. You sit down on a wooden bench in the corner of the room. It has no cushion, but it's warm, or maybe you are. There's a shoebox beside you labeled in case you've forgotten anything important. Inside, a soft handkerchief, a dried daisy, and a postcard that reads, "Well, you've come farther than you think." You sit there for a long time, maybe an hour, maybe just the length of a memory, it doesn't matter. The library isn't going anywhere. Neither are you. No, not yet. The bench is hard, but the kind of hard that teaches your body to soften. You lean back. You feel the quiet settle around you like a coat someone gently draped over your shoulders. There's no clock in this room, no windows, just the ambient hush of paper nearby and the hush inside yourself, which it turns out is even quieter. As after a while you rise, and the bench creaks in a way that feels like a blessing, not a complaint. You nod to the shoebox labeled in case you've forgotten anything important and whisper a thank you, unsure if you're addressing the handkerchief or the postcard or some ancient librarian ghost who invented emotional first aid kits. You step out into the hall. The rest of the library waits. You find yourself drawn toward a staircase you've passed before, one that leads not down but up. The steps look tired, reverent, each one labeled with a word stenciled in small white letters. Pause. I'll forgive. I remember. Rest. I'll try again. I let go. You walk slowly. At the top, there's a lofted gallery. Narrow, shadowed, a single skylight overhead lets in moonlight, or is it morning light? You can't tell, the light here doesn't answer questions. Books line the walls, but these aren't shelved. They're stacked on their sides, on chairs, on windowsills, in corners, like they arrived here and never felt the need to be organized again. The space smells of old blankets, melted wax, dried glue, and something beneath it all, maybe honey, or ink that misses being touched. You spot a tattered sign leaning against a bookshelf, almost apologetically. This is the overflow. The books that didn't belong anywhere else. And next to that, in different handwriting. Or maybe the ones that belong everywhere. You pick up a volume from the floor, the Book of Leftovers. Inside is a haphazard collection of stories, dreams, shopping lists, poems, unfinished letters, a recipe for beet stew annotated with grief. On page 47, she was going to call her father. She made tea instead. The kettle whistled louder than her courage. She drank it with too much sugar and called it victory. You laugh once out loud. The sound startles even you. Tonight's historical fact. During a brief but heartfelt initiative in 1991, one library opened a section called Lost and Found Pages. It invited the public to submit pages from books they had by hand, pages that meant something but that they couldn't afford to keep. Many were fragments, a paragraph here, a single sentence, a verse remembered. The pages were anonymous, collected into binders, and left for others to flip through on days they didn't know what they needed. Historians still debate whether the project had literary value, but a journalist at the time described it as a place to borrow someone else's clarity for a while. Send your cultural note for tonight. In some old Polish libraries, librarians would occasionally adopt a book. This didn't mean removing it from circulation. It meant choosing one volume, often unpopular or underread, and quietly promoting it, placing it in better light, mentioning it by name, moving it to eye level. One librarian reportedly tied a red ribbon around a single copy of the collected works of minor characters, changing the ribbon color weekly to keep it feeling seen. You notice now that many books in this loft have ribbons, paper clips, bookmarks shaped like feathers. Someone been tending to them. You sit beside a stack marked books you'll love more later. The top one is a children's novel called The Girl Who Kept Forgetting but Never Lost Anything. You open to the first page. Once there was a girl who lost her memory often, but her hands always knew where home was. Well, the chapter ends mid-sentence. You don't mind it. You lean back against the wall, knees tucked up, fingers tracing the spine. As outside, the wind murmurs across the skylight like someone flipping a page overhead. And you don't know if this moment is happening now, or if it's something you'll remember years from now as a dream that became a place. But it doesn't matter. It's real enough. You begin to feel it now. The slow, gentle gravity of returns. Not because the library is done with you, not even because the story is ending, but because you're full. You're carrying more than when you arrived, not facts, not quotes, something quieter, something that hums. You descend the steps from the loft, your hand trailing along the rail carved smooth by generations of other quiet wanderers. The words stenciled onto the stairs greet you in reverse now. So let go. So try again. Or rest. So remember. Or forgive. Or pause. Now you do all of those things in the space of 30 seconds. As at the base of the stairs, the light has shifted again. A little warmer, a little more forgiving. The dust in the air glows like floating punctuation. You pass by the returns desk. No one is there. But the lamp is on and someone has placed a bowl of wrapped candies beside a sticky note. The one per goodbyes. Oh, you take one. You pass a child asleep in a beanbag chair clutching a book twice their size. A librarian walks by, covers them gently with a blanket and keeps walking. Neither one wakes up. And here in the quietest hallway of all is one final shelf. So small, wooden, a little crooked. Labeled in delicate script. On books we wrote ourselves. You open the first. There's no author name, no publisher, just a hand-bound notebook filled with letters. To the person I once was. Thank you for surviving long enough to become me. Another entry in a different hand. To whoever finds this, I hope you believe in softness. I hope you take breaks. I hope your favorite book isn't something you had to read for school. Now there are hundreds of these books. No order, no logic, only souls. Some are in Polish, some in English, some in languages you don't recognize. One appears to be a series of musical notations shaped like clouds. You run your hand along the spines, and each one feels like the back of someone's hand. Warm, vulnerable, human. And here is tonight's final cultural offering. There's a term, whispered between certain library staff in southern Poland, used only during closing hours. Well, then, open slowly. It's not a directive, it's a reminder. A suggestion. It's a way of asking both reader and book to approach each other with care. Because not everything wants to be understood all at once. You take that phrase with you now. You walk back toward the main door, not rushing. You pass the chair where you once read rooms without windows, the hallway of hypothetical lives, the wall of emergency poems, the map drawer of feelings. And every space you pass feels like it remembers you, like you left a whisper behind. And at the door, someone has chalked another message. You may leave the library, but the story coming with you. And beneath it. Please come again, even if you don't need a book. You step outside. The night or morning is cool and still. The snow has stopped or maybe just paused. And now you understand. The library was never a building. It was a mirror. It showed you back to yourself, quietly, gently, page by page. You walk into the hush of dawn, the story still open inside you. The spine unbroken. The little chapter unfinished, and in your pockets, a crumpled note, a ribbon from a forgotten shelf, and the sweet weight of knowing you belong to every book you've ever loved. The sky outside is pale and stretched, like it hasn't quite decided whether to be morning or memory. You pause at the bottom of the library's stone steps. Your breath puffs into the air in slow spirals, and for a moment you think about turning back just to sit once more in the velvet armchair where time slowed down. But something in your chest says, keep walking. The story hasn't ended. It's just moved outside for a bit. So you walk. The city is quiet. Still burn like stubborn fireflies, and shop windows flicker with signs too sleepy to be legible. You pass the old tram stop. There's no tram, there's never a tram this early. But the bench is there, and you sit, because benches are the library of the outside world, silent places where things get sorted, remembered, reshelved in the mind. You reach into your coat pocket and pull out a small folded scrap of paper. You didn't know you had it. You unfold it slowly. It's one of the emergency poems. You are allowed to leave without answers. You are allowed to return with questions. You smile, not because it solves anything, but because it's permission you didn't know you needed. A tram hums in the distance, but you don't stand. You sit with the poem a little longer. Tonight's historical note. During the early 1980s, public transit shelters became unofficial branches of the library. Librarians left poetry pamphlets, folded essays, and handwritten stories taped to benches or tucked inside newspaper boxes. These weren't announcements or manifestos, they were gifts. One popular piece was titled "For Reading While Waiting." It included jokes, weather predictions, and a poem that changed each week depending on the mood of the staff. Historians still debate whether this constituted guerrilla literature or community outreach. Either way, the pamphlets were always gone by morning. Your cultural tidbit for this soft hour. In certain towns, people practiced something called W reading on the way. It wasn't just about books. It meant carrying stories into your commute, your errands, your waiting. Some folks kept quote cards in their coat sleeves. Others recited poems under their breath as they walked. One woman reportedly memorized a different sonnet each week and whispered it to her vegetables at the market. "Tomatoes need drama," she said. You think about the books you've carried without knowing. The ones whose lines live in your bones, the stories you never finished but still dream about. They've been with you longer than luggage, lighter than grief, more loyal than memory. You finally rise, the tram has passed. Good, you weren't ready to leave. You take the long way back. Past shuddered. Past the park where pigeons already look busy. Back to the library steps. The doors are closed now, of course they are. But on the ground, just beside the threshold, lies a small object, carefully placed, not lost, deliberate. A love book. Wrapped in brown paper, tied with thread, and labeled in delicate handwriting. For the next reader who forgets they're not alone. You don't open it. Not yet. You tuck it into your coat like it's something alive. Is it strange the way you walk now, different from before? Your steps slower but not hesitant, like the ground is more aware of you, like your shoes are in conversation with the sidewalk. As the morning grows bolder, a soft blue creeps into the sky and windows flicker to life one by one. You stop at a corner bookstore just beginning to unlock its door. The clerk, a man with a knit hat and a tired smile, nods at you like you've both returned from a place that doesn't have a name.
And maybe you have. So you keep going.
So eventually you find a bench near the river. The water is quiet, not still, but not in a hurry either, just like the library. You unwrap the book from your coat and finally untie the thread. The brown paper slides off like an old coat, revealing a worn cover with gold letterings that reads,
The library that believed in you. And inside it's mostly blank. Except for the first page. And that page says, this is your book now. Fill it slowly. Be honest. Leave room.
You look around, there's no one nearby, just you and the bench, and the river remembering how to flow. So you pull a pen from your coat, you forgot you had it. Or maybe it was placed there by someone who knew you'd need it.
And you will begin.
You don't write a story, not exactly.
You write.
And today I remembered how to walk without purpose.
Today I found something I didn't lose, but missed anyway.
Today I was held by a room made of shelves and dust and possibility.
You pause. Then added. Today I became a reader again. And that is enough. For now.
You close the book and hold it against your chest, the way you might hold a warm mug or a letter you haven't mailed. The wind moves gently past your ears and you hear it not as wind but as turning pages, as footsteps on library tile, as a whisper between the shelves that says, you are part of this now. Your final cultural note for this hour. In certain Polish towns, when someone finished a book that changed them, they would leave a single flower on the library steps, not because anyone told them to, but because it felt like a full stop. Tulips in spring, dried herbs in winter. One person left a bouquet of parsley and wild mint with a note. This book reminded me how to be hungry for life again.
Though there are no flowers on the steps today. So you decide quietly that you'll bring one next time. And you will come back. Not because you need something, but because something wordless and patient, is waiting. Still shelved. Still whispering. Still yours.
You sit with the book in your lap long enough for the morning to properly arrive. Not loudly, just with enough confidence that even the air seems brighter. The river gleams, stirred by a breeze too gentle to be called wind. A flock of birds slices quietly across the sky like an underlined sentence, and the city begins to stretch.
You're not in a rush to join it.
The notebook, the library that believed in you, remains warm in your hands like it's remembered things you haven't written yet. You flip to the next page. Blank, Waiting, not demanding. Are you right? I thought the library was a place where books lived. I was wrong. It's where I remembered how to listen to silence without panicking. You pause, unsure of whether you're journaling or composing something sacred. Then you continue. This morning I didn't check the news. I didn't scroll. I didn't measure my worth by notifications. I just remembered a line from a book I never finished and forgave myself. You close the notebook again, not because you're done, but because part of you has learned, finally, that not every moment needs to be filled to be full. You glance around. The bench beside you is still empty but not lonely, just open. You think of the empty chairs in the library, the green velvet one under the skylight, the child-sized seat in the reading nook, the warm stool in front of the books that deserve a second chance. All waiting, not desperate, just hopeful. Tonight's historical entry returns like an echo from a dusty card catalog. In the early 1990s, a librarian in Warsaw started leaving notes in random books, small encouragements unsigned. Phrases like, "Oh, you're doing better than you think." "Well, come back to this page when you're tired." "This book is proud of you." Readers began writing back, not with names, just responses scribbled on the backs of receipts or tucked into the jacket sleeves. "I needed this today, thank you, invisible friend." "I read this page on the train and cried, not from sadness, from finally being seen." "I left a chocolate wrapper between pages 42 and 43. For you." The phenomenon spread. Other libraries joined in. Some tried to catalog the messages. Others chose to let them remain a living archive shifting with each reader's hand. Historians still debate whether this counts as vandalism or community building. But one reader described it best. "I don't know who wrote it, but it felt like someone had been waiting just for me." You rise from the bench slowly, not because your legs are stiff, they are, but because you're trying not to wake the moment. As you walk through the waking city, you notice something you hadn't before. All books, tucked under arms, peeking from handbags. It's a copy of Leaves of Grass on a table, a mystery novel resting on a bakery counter beside a croissant. A child in a coat 3 sizes too big reading aloud to a very patient dog. It's as if the library has spilled out overnight. Or maybe you think it was always here. And you just hadn't learned how to see it yet. You make your way back to the library, not out of need but something quieter. A magnetic pull. A gentle suggestion from the deeper part of yourself. When you arrive, the door is still closed, but now there's something new. A single flower resting on the step. "A lot of today's is easy." No note, just the stem, slightly damp, as if freshly chosen from a sidewalk crack or someone's morning walk. You smile, kneel, and place your hand on the step beside it. Then, without overthinking it, you reach into your coat and place your own offering next to it. The emergency poem. Now, you don't unfold it, you don't explain it. Oh, you just leave it. Oh, because some gifts are not about being received. They're about not being held in any more. Now you walk away again, lighters. And as you do, you hear it, no, feel it, the slow turning of a page. So somewhere behind the library's brick walls, a new reader has entered. So somewhere a chair is being pulled back. The spine is cracking open, not painfully, but like a door held too long shut. And then somewhere inside the stacks, a shelf shuffles slightly, making room for another story. Tonight's historical note drifts in like a bookmark falling from an old novel. In the early 2000s, a Polish artist named Magdalena began a project called the Wandering Library. It consisted of small wooden cabinets placed in train stations, hospital waiting rooms, bus stops, even laundromats, each filled with a rotating collection of donated books and one instruction. Take what you need, leave what you can. She never sought fame or funding. She didn't even track how many cabinets she made. I just wanted to build quiet doors, she said, that opened even when no one knocked. And your final cultural footnote for this moment. In some parts of rural Poland, there's a superstition that if you leave a book open in your home overnight, your dreams will carry its characters. But only if you treat the book gently. Close it too quickly and the characters stay trapped, unfinished, unheard. You pass a window on your walk home and spot a novel on a windowsill open to its last chapter. A mug of tea beside it still steaming. You nod at it like it's an old friend. All because maybe it is. You return to your room and open the library that believed in you one more time. A fresh page. You right. Today I became part of a story. Bigger than loneliness. Quieter than sadness. More generous than time. You pause, then you write. I'm not sure if the library is real. But the part of me it awakened definitely is. You tuck the notebook under your pillow. No, not to forget it, but to let it rest. You pull your blanket up, and before sleep has time to ask permission, you're already somewhere else. A hallway with no clocks. A chair no one rushes to leave. A book waiting to be opened again. The sleep does not come in the usual way. It doesn't crash in or sneak up behind you. It unfolds slow and steady, like the binding of an old book giving way just enough to say, "You're safe to drift now." And drift you do. Is in your dream or what feels like one, you're back inside the library. But this time the walls breathe, not with movement but with memory. The shelves are softer somehow, as though they've grown used to being leaned against. The lamps flicker in a rhythm that matches your heartbeat. Even the silence has texture. You walk barefoot now. There is no need for shoes. The floor beneath you is warm wood and worn carpet and something that feels like pages stacked on top of one another, quiet history cushioning every step. You turn a corner and find a long hallway lined with drawers. Not filing cabinets, drawers like the kind found in old sewing rooms or apothecaries, each one labeled in tight cursive. Regrets I forgave eventually. Jokes I did laugh at until later. Moments I was kinder than necessary. Things I thought I'd forgotten but didn't. The first time I knew I was loved. You reach out and pull open the last ones. It's full of ribbons. All different textures, all different colors, no explanation. Just the weightless suggestion that something had been wrapped, unwrapped, and remembered. You sit beside the drawer and breathe. And that's when you hear it. Footsteps. Not menacing, not rushed, just familiar. You glance up expecting to see someone else, but it's you. Not now you, not child you, but the version of you that exists in the margins, the one that never made it into your social media posts or diary entries, the one who wept in stairwells and loved without being asked, the one who kept showing up even when there wasn't a clear reason to. Though they sit beside you quiet. You don't speak. There's no need. As after a moment they hand you a folded piece of paper. On it in your own handwritings. You've made it through every version of yourself so far. They smile not broadly but with understanding. Then they stand, walk back down the hallway, and disappear into the stack labeled people I forgot to become. You stay a little longer. All because you can. All because no one's asking you to hurry. Because time in this library has long since given up trying to be linear. Tonight's historical moment folds in gently like a corner turned down in a well-loved book. In 1985, a group of Polish educators launched a reading initiative in psychiatric hospitals. It wasn't just for entertainment, it was for reclamation. Patients were invited to write in the books, not marginal notes but full pages, additions, edits, poems, memories. Though the idea was simple, you are still a voice, even now, especially now. One book, a battered copy of The Brothers, contains a note on the inside cover. As every time I read this, I understand myself more, even if I don't like what I find. The scholars still debate whether this project was therapeutic or literary sabotage. No one debates whether it was necessary. And here's your cultural detail for this late hour. In some parts of rural Poland, it was believed that dreams inside libraries were more meaningful. They were called shelf dreams. Stories gifted to the dreamer by the books themselves. Entire poems sometimes would be composed overnight by people who never wrote while awake. One elderly farmer reportedly dreamed an entire play after falling asleep in the natural science section. He never wrote it down. But he told it, scene by scene, to every guest who visited him for the next 3 years. Back in your dream, the shelves begin to hum. Not a song, just that low vibration of being understood. You lie down in the hallway, head resting gently on the drawer of things I thought I'd lost forever. It smells like cedar and something fainter, something familiar. While you close your eyes, and the library lets you sleep. So when you wake, it's morning again. But this morning feels different. Not louder or brighter, just wider. You stretch beneath the covers, half expecting the library to still be around you. But it's not. You're home. You recognize the walls, the soft creak of your floorboards, the mug from last night still on the desk. The notebook, the library that believed in you, resting where you left it. Now you reach for it before your glasses, before your phone. Now you open to a fresh page. The paper feels like it slept beside you. Now you write, I dreamed a hallway full of drawers. And the drawer knew my names. You pause, then added, somewhere in me there's still a story unfolding. And that's enough reason to wake up today. As after breakfast you dress slowly, not sluggishly, just with the kind of pace that knows the value of buttoning your coat with intention. You slip the notebook into your bag and glance at the door. You don't know where you're going yet, but that's never stopped a good story before. And outside, the sidewalk glistens with thaw. Snow softens into puddles. Trees drip in the sun's quiet rhythm. As you walk, the city feels a bit more readable, like a place written in a language you're just starting to remember. You pass a bus stop. Someone left a poetry book on the bench, pages bookmarked with dried clover. You pass a shop window. There's a sign that says today's special, kindness with extra cream. Now you laugh softly, no one hears. Or maybe someone does. And just as you're about to turn the corner, you feel it. A tug in your bag. Not literal, just awareness. You pause, open the notebook, and there it is. Written in a different hand, or maybe in yours before you forgot. A return soon. The library misses you too. You run your fingers over the ink. The page is still warm. And then somewhere deep in the city, or perhaps inside you, a shelf shifts slightly. A chair is pulled back. A spine is waiting. And so is the next chapter. By now, even your shadow seems slower. Not sluggish, just thoughtful. Like it's learned to pause at doorways and glance backward at sunbeams before deciding whether to step through. You keep walking, notebook in your bag, scarf a little too long for the weather. The streets are awake now. Not rushing, just unrolling themselves like a scroll. Coffee shops open with the sigh of sleepy hinges, and windows bloom with condensation, shaped briefly by fingertips drawing question marks, hearts, or faces. Everything looks the same. And yet everything is different. You stop beside a low stone wall warmed by early light. On top of it sits a book. It isn't wrapped in brown papers. It isn't labeled or guarded.
Oh, it just sits there, unafraid. You glance around, no one claims it. You sit beside it. The cover is blue velvet, frayed at the edges. The title, How to Carry What Can't Be Fixed. You don't open it right away. You just place your hand on top, feeling the faded fabric. It's warm from the sun, or perhaps from the last person who held it. When you do open it, you find a page half filled in someone's careful handwriting. I wrote these words on the day I realized closure is a myth. Not because it doesn't exist, but because I never needed a closed door. There's only one I could choose not to walk through. Though there's no table of contents. No chapters. Just entries like footprints. Poems that begin mid-sentence. Letters that never end. Marginal notes that seem to echo something you once thought and forgot. On page 83, there are names I don't say out loud anymore. But I still set places for them when I remember how much I've grown. And on page 120, some pain doesn't leave, it just changes seats. So sometimes it even drives. But it doesn't get the last word, not anymore. You'd turn to the back. No author listed. Just one final note. If this book helped you, leave it somewhere warm for the next person. If you can't part with it, write your own ending and tuck it inside. You close the book gently and slide it back into the sun. Because maybe today isn't the day you keep something. Maybe today is the day you trust someone else will find it. Later that afternoon, you return to the libraries. Not because anything is missing, but because you now understand that returning isn't about need. It's about continuation. The door opens with the same whisper it always had. You step inside and everything feels quieter than usual. Not empty, just listening more deeply. You nod to the front desk. No one is there, but a thermos of tea sits beside a mug that reads, Cataloging Feelings Since 1964. The mug is chipped. You like that about it. The hallway greets you like a worn coat. You walk slowly, past the map drawers, past the emergency poems, past the shelf of books that wrote themselves while no one was looking. You pause at each one not to reread but to acknowledge. Like tipping your hat to a stranger you've come to trust. You find your way to the room of unsent letters again. The candlelight flickers. The air smells faintly of wax, rosemary, and something unnameable, like dust that remembers how to hold light. You reach into your bag and pull out the libraries that believed in you. There's no ceremony. You simply place it on the shelf marked. A book's still in progress. You leave it there. Because it's ready. Because you are. Tonight's historical thread wraps softly around your shoulders like a scarf you didn't know someone knitted for you.
In 2002, a librarian in Gdynia started a shelf labeled to be continued. It wasn't for series or sequels. It was for stories never finished, drafts, diaries, notebooks left behind or donated anonymously. Patrons were invited to read them, write their own endings, or simply leave a note of encouragement tucked between pages. One man returned every week for a month to write just one more sentence in a journal titled "The Last Morning We Spoke." He never signed his name, but the final page reads, "And even if she never reads this, I will have told the truth somewhere." Historians never officially recorded this program. It wasn't in the funding reports. It never made the newspapers. But the shelf remains. And people still add their stories. And your cultural detail for this hour, this breath, this heartbeat. In older villages, it was believed that a person's soul could live in the last page they wrote. This is why final pages were rarely torn out even in anger, even if the book was ruined, even if the writer was gone. Because the final page, it was said, could still be finished by time, by grief, by someone else who loved words too much to leave them hanging. You walk now toward the chair beneath the skylight. You don't sit just yet. You rest your hand on the armrest. Let it recognize you. You notice a child curled up nearby, reading a book titled "Why the World Feels Softer After a Good Cry." The child is asleep now. The book rests gently on their chest like a small animal that chose to stay. You smile. You let them be. You head toward the window. Outside, the sky is soft, as if the world itself just exhaled. And you, reader, writer, dreamer, librarian in trainings. You step back into your life with the weight of nothing unnecessary. Though the next chapter is blank. And that is a gift. Not a threat. You leave the library the way a person leaves a memory, not with finality, but with the quiet awareness that part of it is coming with you. The doors close behind you like eyelids, gently, without sound. The city greets you again, though it no longer feels entirely separate from the library. The cobblestones look like scattered sentences. The lamp posts stand like well-worn bookmarks. Even the passing pigeons seem to glide across invisible lines of poetry. You walk without direction. That, you've learned, is sometimes the way to find something. Your shoes tap soft rhythms on the sidewalk. Each step feels like punctuation, a comma here, a semicolon there. You turn a corner and come to a small public garden, unkempt in the best way, overgrown hedges, ivy crawling up a crumbling fountain, one rusted bench whose armrests have clearly hosted many hesitant conversations. You said. The afternoon sun lines in, warm on your shoulders. You open your notebook again. The library that believed in you still smells like the shelves, ink, dust, maybe something faintly like tea leaves and candle smoke. The scent of stories that refused to disappear. You're right. I once thought healing was a destination. Now I think it's more like a library card. You keep checking things out. Sorrow, joy, memory, laughter. And sometimes you return them late.
So sometimes you forget them altogether. But the library forgives you. And it always lets you borrow again. You pause, the page breathes. Now tonight's historical memory rises like steam from the fountain beside you. In the late 1980s, when Poland was grappling with the shifting shape of itself, some libraries began circulating emotion kits alongside books. These weren't official loans, they were quiet gestures. A librarian might slip a pressed flower into the pages of a memoir about war. A tiny tin of lavender placed inside a book on grief. A note tucked into a poetry collection. You're allowed to cry even on page 3. How historians didn't bother cataloging this, but readers remembered. One woman in a 2005 interview held up a tin button she said fell from between the pages of the Diary of a Survivor. I don't know what it meant, she said, but I held it during every appointment with my doctor. It made me braver. And here is your cultural echo for today. In some villages, it was tradition to recite a blessing before opening any old book aloud. Not a religious invocation, but something softer. A murmured phrase passed down through generations. May the pages hold me kindly. May the words not wake anything I'm not ready to meet. You whisper it now, almost without meaning to. Though the garden listens. A breeze rustles through ivy like a sigh made visible. And in your lap, the notebook glows with presence. Though you flip to a blank page. Though this one you'd title, What I Forgot to Say. And you write. Thank you to the chair that didn't break under my tiredness. To the poems that remembered what I was afraid to name. To the quiet. To the softness. To the people I'll never meet, but whose fingerprints I felt anyway. You sit there for a long time, the way only someone who has been unhurried on purpose can. And when you finally stand, the bench holds your shape a moment longer, then releases it like breaths. Evening returns not with urgency but with grace. The sun lowers itself like a curtain in a theater where every seat is taken, yet no one claps at the end. The sky turns the color of aged paper, and the air becomes thick with the smell of cooked dinners and the sound of windows being opened or closed. The world makes space for night gently, as if offering it a blanket and tea. You walk through it like a returning character. Though the city feels softer now, somehow more legible, as if its streets have footnotes, its alleys epilogues. You pass a flower stand. The vendor is sweeping leaves and humming. You pause. There's a small bundle of yellow tulips near the edge, not wrapped, not fresh, but earnest. You buy them, not because they're perfect, because they remind you of a chapter you're still writing. You carry them through the streets like a promise. Back at the library, the door is locked for the night. Of course it is. But you don't need to go inside. Instead, you place the tulips on the top step, just beside the daisy someone else left earlier. You untie a piece of notebook paper and leave it beneath them. Oh, you don't sign it. Oh, it reads, I returned, and I was never scolded for the time I took away. I was only welcomed for the stories I brought back. Now, tonight's historical glimpse comes from a librarian's journal dated 1994. She had worked through protests, paper shortages, and more than a decade of whispered silences. She wrote, "Now, there are days when not a single person visits, and still I open the doors. Because maybe, just maybe, today is the day someone needs a book more than they needed heirs." She never published those entries, but her notebook remains in the library archives, filed under devotions. And your cultural moment now. There's an old belief that libraries hold onto the emotions of their readers, woven invisibly into the paper fibers. That when you hold a book that once comforted someone else, some small echo of that comfort rests inside your hands, not haunting, just accompanying. You sit on the library step beside the flowers, under the dim glow of your notebook rests beside you, open, not written in, just waiting. And it occurs to you, maybe you've become part of the archive now. Not with fame, not with publication, but with a presence. With having sat still long enough to be shelved in someone else's story. You glance up at the stars beginning to bloom across the sky. You don't wish. You don't ask. You just breathe. And that's enough. Because the story doesn't end here. It only turns the page. You remain on the step outside the library long after the sky has turned indigo. The air has cooled into something deliberate now, not cold but crisp, like it wants you to notice it. A flickers above, painting your shadow across the stone like a half-finished sentence. You pull your coat, but not because you're uncomfortable. You're anchoring yourself. Because in this moment you're not a passerby, you're not a guest. You're a footnote in a larger volume, and the book hasn't closed. Your notebook lies on your lap, and although you haven't written in it since placing the tulips, it feels heavy with meaning. You flip through its pages slowly now, deliberately, like touching photographs in an attic you forgot belonged to you. Each entry is less a line of text than a moment you lived. On one page you find a smudge, just a thumbprint half faded. Maybe it's yours, maybe it's someone else from the library. You decide not to wipe it away. You leave it. Because sometimes evidence of being held is all the validation a page needs. You turn to the back, where the last few blank sheets wait like a quiet room no one has entered yet. And with the softest pen strokes you write. The library was never about books. It was about being read. By a chair, a silence, a stranger's handwriting. By a story that chose you even before you opened the cover. You pause. Tonight I sit on its doorstep. Not to enter,
but to remember that it never truly closed behind me. Now the ink glistens for a moment, then sinks into the paper like rain into earth. Now tonight's historical footnote lands gently in your chest. In several Polish cities after the fall of the Iron Curtain, people began returning books they had kept hidden for years, decades even. Books once banned, once borrowed in fear and hidden beneath floorboards, behind dressers, in false drawers under beds. One librarian described it as a return of breath. A woman returned a book in 1993 she had taken in 1956. It was a collection of political essays. She didn't give her name. She only said, "It kept me company in the years when I couldn't speak." The book was placed back on the shelf. So I still welcome no fine, no judgment. So I just returned and held. Send your cultural echo tonight. There is an old tale from the mountain regions of southern Poland that says every library has a secret book, a volume that holds only what the heart cannot say aloud. No ink, no title, just wait. The story goes that only those who have learned the art of sitting still long enough can find it. It appears only once. And when you open it, the pages reflect your memories back at you not as they happened, but as they were felt. You glance around now as if the book might reveal itself to you here on this step. But maybe it already has. Maybe you've been writing it this entire time. You look up at the sky. So somewhere behind the clouds, the moon is rising. Not proud, not distant, just present. You whispered toward it. I'm ready to be unfinished. Because maybe that's what wholeness means. Not completion, but continuation. Morning again. Soft, gold-edged, quiet as a breath through parted lips. You slept without realizing. Head resting against the library door, knees pulled in, notebook cradled like a candle in both hands. When you open your eyes, the city is beginning again, but gently. Footsteps on cobblestones. A bicycle bell in the distance. The aroma of bread unfurling from a nearby window. You stretch slowly, mindfully, as if your body has learned the rhythms of the shelves, the packing of prose. And you know what you need to do. You walk around the side of the library to the little garden tucked behind the building. It's modest. Just a patch of grass, a crooked bench, a wrought iron gate that squeals when opened. But to you, it's sacred now. You sit on the bench and remove the notebook one last time. You take a breath, and then you write. Let this be the final entry. Not because the story ends, but because it has seeped into my spine. I will carry it in how I hold the door open for others. In how I ask questions I no longer need answers to. In how I greet silence like an old friend, not a threat. You flip to the inside cover. There, beneath your names, you add in careful lettering. On to the next reader. Take your time. Read it slowly. You are part of the story now. You rise, walk to the back step where a small box labeled Donations Welcome, especially the ones without price tags, sits waiting.
You place the notebook inside. You close the lid. And you don't look back. Because some acts of letting go are so complete, they don't need dramatics. Just a presence.
Tonight's historical offering, one final thread. In 2011, a small rural library in Poland held a midnight event called the Silent Circulation. No announcements, no fanfare, just unlocked doors, candlelight, and soft music. Patrons arrived barefoot. They were invited to walk the stacks in silence. To take one book, any book, and leave something of their own behind.
A note. A poem. A little button. A strand of hair. And then an apology.
One person left their grandfather's war medal with a note that read, "He believed in stories more than victories."
So that medal remains in the archive. As unclaimed. And not forgotten.
And here's your final cultural grace. Some elders say libraries are stitched into the soul like lullabies. That once you've truly belonged to one, you never belong again, even in places without books, even in years without time to read. You carry the hush with you, you become a shelf. And someone somewhere will sit down next to you and finally exhale.
You walk away from the gardens, back into the waking world.
And though no book is in your hand, you feel the weight of one in your chest.
Not heavy, just real. I like memory. I like love. Like a story that never asks to be finished. Only passed on.
There's a feeling in your chest now that is quite joy and isn't quite sorrow. It's steadier, quieter. A sensation like closing a book you never wanted to end and realizing it hasn't, not really, not in any way that matters. You cross the street slowly, the rhythm of your steps echoing in your ears like the slow tick of an old clock. You pass familiar buildings with sleepy vendors, windows glowing with morning routines, an old man pouring water over a flower box like he's feeding an altar. You pass the bus stop where the blue velvet book once sat, and though it's gone now, the bench still hums with the presence of something that stayed longer than expected.
You're not sure where you're going. You've stopped needing to be.
Because once you've been held by a place like that, by a story that chose you, you begin to understand that some destinations live inside you now. They are carried, not traveled to. They rise like warmth in the chest whenever you pause long enough to breathe deeply. Whenever you make space for silence. You walk until the city begins to blur again, not from speed but from stillness. You stop in front of a mirror in a shop window, and for the first time in a long time you recognize yourself, not the face you perform, but the eyes that have learned how to linger.
You lean in and whisper, "I remember you. You're the one who kept turning pages. Even when the ending didn't make sense yet." And you smile.
Because somehow you've become the kind of person who talks to your reflection not with shame but with care. The kind of person who leaves poems on benches, who carries notebooks not just to write in but to give away. You find yourself beside a small park. You sit beneath a tree whose leaves rustle like pages. You reach into your coat, now a little wrinkled, a little familiar, and find not the notebook but a single folded note tucked where your glove should be.
Oh, you didn't place it there. But you know who did. Oh, it reads, "Oh, we do not close books here. Well, we only turn soft corners. Until the next reader. Until the next breath. You fold the note and place it in your pocket, the one you never use." Tonight's final historical offering arrives like a letter with no stamp, just your name written in careful script. In 2018, an elderly man in central Poland donated a box to his local library. Inside, 43 notebooks, each one dated, each one filled not with thoughts but transcribed dialogue overheard in trams, shops, park benches. Entire decades of anonymous conversations preserved by a man who called himself just a listener. The box was titled "What the World Sounds Like When No One Is Watching." It remains in storage, but some librarians sneak a notebook out now and then. To remind themselves that stories don't require authors. Only ears. Only hearts. And one last cultural footnote for this long, slow walk. In a small village near Lublin, it's said that if you walk quietly enough near a library at night, you can hear it breathing. Not the wind, not pipes, but the shelves inhaling memory and exhaling peace. No one records it. No one proves it. But everyone who's heard it nods the same way. It's as if remembering a lullaby their grandmother never sang, but still somehow passed on. You close your eyes beneath the tree. You breathe in. You breathe out. And somewhere on a shelf, in a letter, in a chair, you are being remembered too. Not because you were loud, but because you were here. So now, reader, sink softly into your pillow. Let your breath slow, one inhale at a time. There's no more story to chase tonight. No more pages to flip, no decisions to be made, no conclusions to draw, just this moment. Just this soft hush wrapping itself around your shoulders like a woolen shawl. The library is still there, you know that now. It doesn't need walls to exist, doesn't need bricks or stamps or checkout slips. It lives inside you, stitched into the part of your heart that learned how to sit still, how to hold silence without rushing to fill it, how to turn each page of your life with hands that no longer tremble at the blank ones. Close your eyes gently, as though you're turning down the corner of a page you love. Let your limbs grow heavy and warm. Let your thoughts loosen, not vanish, just drift. Let them become echoes down long hallways, paper rustles, footsteps in the distance. Familiar, safe. And if you find yourself dreaming, let the library return to you. Let the shelves greet you. Let a chair be waiting.
Let a poem be folded in your coat pocket. Let your own handwriting appear in a margin, scribbled between the lines.
I'm still here. I'm still listening. I'm still worth the quiet.
You did not finish this story tonight.
You became a part of it.
Now rest. The library will hold your place. Until you're ready to return.
Or the end.
Or perhaps just a long pause.